Schaefer,
Here.
Mr. Urban,
Here.
Mr. McGinley,
Present.
Mr. Mitchell.
See you. Say it didn't feel well, so we may not. No.
Okay, you have 6 of 7 present.
Okay. Need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposition unheard, motion carries. Public comment on agenda items. Anyone who would like to address the commission at this time from the public on agenda items? Do we have anybody on the Zoom?
Not with hands up, no.
Okay. Mr. Ritchik.
So first, as part of the secretary report, I just wanted to talk about consultant and research requests. So if anybody has a research request to put through to the Pennsylvania Economy League, please let me know. What I'm going to do going forward is if I get a research request, I'm just going to bring it up at the next meeting, make sure everybody's okay with everything. And, you know, we can just get some head nods on, does everybody want to pursue with the research request? And then we'll go ahead and do it. Next thing would be the secretary report. So I'm going to make a motion to approve the minutes of the September 26, 2024 meeting.
Second.
Motion and a second on the question. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any in opposition, any abstentions? None heard, motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Malcolmus?
Yes, we do have a bill from our solicitor in the amount of $9,926.98. So far, we haven't received any other bills.
Okay. Very good.
So I'm just gonna forward that to the county.
Please. No. No. Mr. Khan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, the commission just met in an executive session prior to this meeting to discuss the legal advice provided in our firm's memo to this commission dated September of 2024. And I believe there may be a motion from the commission concerning the publication of that report. Should I wait until that motion before I continue? Or
Yeah, I'll make a motion to publish the report created by the solicitor.
I'll
There's a
second.
Second. We have a motion on the floor and a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any in opposition, any abstentions? None heard, motion carries. So yes, we will be publishing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I believe that memorandum will be made part of the record for today's meeting. At a high level, what we were asked to take a look at were certain aspects of the Home Rule Charter that impacted the operations of the offices of District Attorney and the Controller. That analysis very neatly ties in with the, in my opinion, excellent analysis and research done by the Pennsylvania Economy League, which I understand is going to be presented this evening. But at a very high level, what the memoranda answers are the questions of number one, what ability does this commission have to enact a new home rule charter? And the answer is that this commission has the powers that were given to it by the voters. In particular, when a county is contemplating changing anything about how county officials are being elected, a new form of government is required. And so that is the proper purview of a commission such as this. There are a number of aspects of the charter concerning those particular offices, both sections that define limitations or powers of those offices, as well as provisions that would have an impact on office holders, such as resign the run, such as term limits, such as limitations on future engagement or employment with the county. As I think will be borne out by the Pennsylvania Economy League's report, these are all provisions that have precedent to some degree with other home rule bodies in Pennsylvania. There is certainly case law that supports the validity of a number of these different provisions. And as with anything else in public law, someone can always bring a challenge in court. And sometimes a court might find that a law says something other than what we thought it said. But having said that, there isn't anything about those provisions as we read it that it was in direct conflict with what a home rule county is permitted to do. Home rule counties are presumed to have the ability to do things differently than what the county code says. They are presumed to do things differently than what the state legislature originally thought of when they set up counties in Pennsylvania, provided that they do not go against expressly prohibited areas that the Pennsylvania state legislature has said it may not touch. So again, I think that will all be borne out in the consultant's presentation today. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the commission also discussed in executive session just some of the limitations on the ability to hire a recording secretary, and we went through some of the options that are available to the commission, and I believe there will be a motion later on tonight's agenda that will abide by some of the recommendations that I made at the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Your turn there.
Thank you very much. First, I want to let you know that Patty was unable to attend tonight. She is at another home rule session for the city of Shamokin. So we did have a one conflict. They meet on Monday, first Monday of the month, but she will be here for the rest of the meetings this month. So we were asked to look at the differences between controller and DA in the various charters. And I'm going to tell you, this is sort of a high level view. You can get into a lot of language, and I don't know how much language you want to have in this comparison. For instance, you'll see that in terms of the extra powers and duties of controller, I gave you that attachment, which runs, I think, to 10 pages. And I'm not even sure those are all the powers or duties necessarily listed for the controller in all of the charters. So, but it gives you an idea. Some charters have a very extensive lists for these things. Some charters have only a paragraph or only a couple of sentences. And one of the things you want to think about as you're moving forward and deciding if you want to change things, where you want to go, is thinking of the charter as your framework and your administrative code as filling that framework out. And you'll see in particular in this comparison, when you're looking at Allegheny County, most of Allegheny County's fleshed out wording for these positions are not in the actual charter. They are in the administrative code, where it goes into great detail. Allegheny County's charter is less than 30 pages, but its administrative code is over 200 pages. So that gives you an idea of some of the differences that you're looking at. So basically, though, all of the 7 home rule counties, and again, this does not include Philly, and going forward, I can't include Philly, but for purposes for tonight, we don't have Philly. We do have the county code. So all of the home rule charters have at large 4-year terms that must be county residents for controller and DA. So that's pretty standard. Luzerne County is the only home rule charter county with a resign to run prohibition and a cooling off prohibition for those offices. Only 2 counties have term limits for both DA and controller. Northampton County just in the last year has talked about term limits. They have limited the controller, they've term limited counsel, and they are talking about term limiting the DA as well. In addition, the County of Erie is also proposing term limits. There's a gentleman that is putting this up. I don't know how much support it has, proposing term limits for their elected officials for 3 4-year terms. And also in Lehigh County, they put in an establishment of term limits can come through a charter amendment. So obviously this whole issue of term limits has been coming up more recently, particularly if you look at the age of the charters. You know, all the charters, the county charters, were mostly done in the 70s. This whole, thing about term limits is starting to come up more lately than it had in the past. And of course, Luzerne is the newer of the charters. Okay, 5 out of 7 counties prohibit the controller and DA from holding another elected or appointed office, as does the county code. There's great variety in what kind of offices or positions. Some charters say you can't do this, some charters say you can't do that. But all of them have some sort of prohibitions around those sort of things. Where am I here? Okay, most of them have language saying the office is forfeit in case of a crime. The county code has that specifically for the DA. That is not included in Luzerne. Most counties, including Luzerne, stipulate the controller and DA must be full-time. In terms of the county code, that depends on the size of your county. So if you look at just look quickly at table 1, that header there shows you what class the counties would be if they were in the county code. And you'll see that most of them, including Luzerne, are 3rd class counties. And then we have 2nd class with Allegheny, and Delaware is 2A. So all those are bigger. It's the smaller counties where they're looking at not necessarily having a full-time DA in terms of the county code, not this class of county. This class of county is you shall have a full-time DA. Okay. 3 of the 7 counties address a temporary absence for controller and DA, and that's outlined there, and who makes that decision. Luzerne, Erie, and Delaware do that, as does the county code. Again, the granting of controller powers and duties varies greatly from, a paragraph to pages and pages, depending on what you're looking at. There are differences in appointment of solicitor. Now, all the charters say, obviously Luzerne included, that you automatically get a solicitor. And then the county code prohibits certain elected office holders from running for the office of controller through a 1 or 2 year cooling off period, depending on which position it is, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I think the deal with looking at the comparisons, I don't know if you've actually had any discussion on what you want to do with these positions or some of these issues. So I'm interested in where the commission feels they want to look at particular issues. You've heard from speakers. You have this comparison that you can look at. So I think the commission needs to look at, okay, we've had this information. Where do we want to go? What do we think about some of these issues? If there are other issues that you would like me to look at in terms of a comparison that aren't included here, I can, go ahead and do that. But I think then the next step at some point becomes the commission drilling into more, how they feel about some of these issues. So that is my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Florence is not here right now. She's probably posting that one item. Number 5, approval of terms for the clerk. Yeah, would you read the motion, please?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, based on my review of the past meetings and discussions with individual commission members, as well as a review of the vote, which was unanimous by county council on September 24th, which approved the county chief clerk, Ms. Lawrence, to assist the commission as she's been doing by, among other things, supporting meetings, helping with the website, and helping with other duties. For all those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I would propose the following language for a motion for the commission to consider. Motion to authorize payment to County of Luzerne for services performed by clerk in assisting commission with meetings and website at clerk's regular hour for services performed during regular business hours, and time and a half for services performed outside the hours of 9 a.m. to 4:30 or on weekends or holidays, subject to written agreement negotiated by Office of Law and Commission Solicitor and signed by Commission Treasurer.
We have a motion. Would someone want to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Lawrence is not here. On the question, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any in opposition, any abstentions? None heard. Motion carries. Make sure you provide Ms. Lawrence that motion, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. We have a few interviews scheduled this evening. Mr. Baldino, you want to come to the podium, please? You have to make sure that mic is on. Yeah, I think there's a button there somewhere. I think it's on the microphone. Oh, it's not plugged in, so the button's not going to work regardless, right? There we are, Jonathan. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So, thank you for the invitation. And I mailed this. If you've all read it, I'm quite willing to dispense with whatever summary I prepared and just have you ask questions. Your preference.
Mr. Baldini, we would like to hear your information first,
Okay,
and then I'm sure we're going to have some questions.
I expected that. So I will just summarize because I don't want to read this, right? But I provided it so you have some historical context and more details, and certainly I'd want to share quickly or try to get it shared quickly. So first, again, thank you for the invitation, and I hope that my experience and expertise in this area is of value to you. I'm currently an emeritus professor of political science from Wilkes University, which means I'm retired. And I've been somewhat active as a scholar, published a few books dealing with elections and voting. And my most recent book, and I only raised this because it's relevant, is with Paula Holoviak, a professor at Kutztown. It's on Pennsylvania government and politics, understanding public policy in the Keystone State. That was recently published in March of 2014 with Penn State University Press. So now getting to my experience on the study commission of 20 that 2001 and to 03, there was an 11-member commission, and it reflected I think the full range of political philosophies from liberal, centrist, conservative, and libertarian. And we had very lively discussions over the time that we met. They were always civil and very informative, I thought. Often drew a reasonably good sized audience on the campus of LCCC. On at least 4 occasions, we traveled and we visited locations around the county to afford the residents of those areas to speak directly to the commission. We hired a solicitor, Mr. James Ferry, the Pennsylvania Economy League. And we had a clerk, and I didn't make note of that, Christine Katzhock. She was hired as clerk. We spent the first few months doing what you already have begun to do, which is to interview members of the government. We, at that point, were interviewing commissioners, the row officers, which were still in existence, and any other relevant people. We also invited to meet with us the representatives of home rule counties who were within a reasonably short drive. So we had someone come down from Lackawanna County and someone come up from Lehigh County, and we did a few interviews over the phone. We spent the first 9 months drafting a proposed charter. Well, actually, after a few months, we decided to actually move forward with a charter proposal, because if I remember the rules on this, you have to decide as a commission whether or not you want to change the charter. And then once that's decided, then you draft the charter. So the first real serious vote was, do we want to change from commission form to something else? We voted that, moved forward, spent the rest of that first 9 months drafting a charter, voted on that, it was unanimous. But because our charter included districts, commissions are given an extra 9 months to draw the districts and go through all of that. When those rules were written, the technology did not exist to create districts within seconds. Okay, the software is now available. We had King's GIS department volunteered and did that work for next to nothing. So it didn't take us quite as long to get the districts drawn. But then we also had to draw or devise a way of having of who would draw the districts. And so we created a redistricting commission, which I'll get to. All right, so the main features of the charter that we proposed was a council of 9 members, 3 elected at large, 6 by districts. The members were elected to 4-year terms with no term limits. I oppose districts, and I gather you've heard this before. My main reasons for opposing districts, excuse me 1 second, old eyes. My main reason for opposing districts is that they foster parochialism. Members elected by districts tend to advocate for their constituents, even at the expense of the needs of a larger community, which contributes to pork barrel spending and other deals that add to the cost of government. Luzerne County's population is not so large or diverse, in my opinion, that it would benefit from districts. The other reasons that I oppose districts are that districts must be drawn to meet the 1 person, 1 vote requirement, as well as being contiguous. That means whole, you can't break them up. Compact, that means that essentially they shouldn't be very weirdly shaped, right? Also, minimizing the division of municipalities. Achieving these criteria are compounded when gerrymandering is introduced. When districts are gerrymandered, the resulting legislative body's composition can disproportionately represent the party that drew the districts. The majority party can then retain control over the body until the next redistricting 10 years later. Why open the door to the evils of gerrymandering by adding districts? Okay, so because the charter called for district or election by districts for 6 people, the charter proposed the creation of a redistricting commission rather than invest that power in the hands of a council. The commission members were to be appointed by the executive and confirmed by council. It was hoped that this arrangement would prevent gerrymandering, but there's no guarantee that it would. So we also proposed an elected county executive to serve a 4-year term without term limits. The executive could veto ordinances by vetoes. The executive could veto ordinances, but vetoes could be overridden by a majority plus 1 vote of the council. The executive had the authority to hire and fire a professional county manager, which I'll get to, who had to be confirmed by council. As envisioned, the executive was to be the political arm of the executive branch, engaging in policy discussions with council, while the manager would oversee the county's administrative units, the bureaucracy. I supported an elected county executive, as did a large majority of the commissioners. But those who opposed the position eventually were convinced that it was necessary to provide checks on council and balance its powers. Adding a professional, nonpartisan manager calmed some of those concerns. More importantly, all the commissioners understood the importance of separation of powers. Having lived under the commissioner form of government, which with 3 commissioners held both the legislative and executive authority of government, there was a compelling interest in preventing power from being concentrated in such a body again. Now, the county manager served at the pleasure of the county executive and would be signed to a contract of a specified length that could be extended or ended. Qualifications for this position were rather detailed. I didn't write all of them down, but included types of acceptable degrees, length of prior and relevant experience, and other things. The manager was expected, as I said, to handle the day-to-day operation of the county's government in a professional, nonpartisan manner, and I supported that position. There were a number of departments that were created that consolidated offices that were once in the row offices, and the departments that we came up with: administrative services, finance, human resources, general services, judicial service and record, and a separate, very similar to the present situation, present government, a separate office of law headed by the county solicitor, who was appointed by the executive and confirmed by council. All department heads were appointed by the county executive and confirmed by council. The county's charter, as you know, I've just heard this report, our county charter proposed a separately elected county district attorney, which, by the way, is required by state law. You couldn't just do away with a district attorney, right? And a separately elected county controller as a check on council and the executive. Our charter recognized the need for ABCs. They were identified. Some of them were named, including a board of elections and registration, which I'll get to. And our charter also included a provision for initiative and referendum. We thought it was important for the people to initiate legislation as they see fit, thereby bypassing council. Referendum, I won't go into the details there, but it's another progressive era tool of direct democracy or attempted direct democracy. So the Board of Elections and Registration was to have 5 members, the county executive plus 4 others to be appointed by the executive and confirmed by council. There would be 2 registered Democrats, 2 registered Republicans. I did not support this, but compromised, obviously. I did not support it because I did not believe the executive would add much to the election board. And if anything, it would complicate the separation of powers that we were striving for in this charter. Okay, so some thoughts on how to improve the Board of Elections and Registration. By way of background, in January of 2012, the very first council met and named 4 people to the election board. 4 members were screened. Those 4 members, and I was one of the 4, those 4 members screened for a 5th position, the chairperson. We ended up selecting H. Jeremy Packard, who was then the president or head of School of Wyoming Seminary, who was a registered independent. Given the sparse language in the charter that described the board's powers, the board carefully exercised its authority as we were mindful that as the first board, we were establishing precedents that would be followed by later boards. We assumed that we had inherited all the authority held by the former commissioners to run elections and to deal with everything related to elections. We were to learn differently. The election bureau director at the time was Mr. Leonard Piazza. To us, he appeared competent and had the support of the election bureau staff. However, it wasn't long before Mr. Piazza engaged in behavior that led to his termination by the manager, Mr. Robert Lawton. During the dispute between Mr. Lawton and Mr. Piazza claimed that he reported only to the election board and not the manager, and that only the election board could discipline him. Mr. Lawton clearly disagreed and argued that only he had the authority to hire and fire the director and any member of the election bureau staff. So based on our initial assumptions that the board had the authority to hire and fire and all that, and then having heard from Mr. Lawton, we were uncertain of our position. So we sought guidance from the then Secretary of the Commonwealth, Ms. Carol Achel. And she consulted with her legal staff. And the opinion that we received from her was that under home rule, the election board had essentially the same powers as the former county commissioners over elections. So to conduct elections, count ballots, settle disputes, certify elections, all of that. But under the charter, the manager assumed the former commissioner's authority to hire and fire the election bureau director and staff. Once this was resolved, Mr. Lawton graciously, I would say, allowed the election bureau, a member of the election bureau, to serve on the search committee to replace Mr. Piazza, and for the election bureau to offer us assessments of the candidate and then to recommend from among the candidates who the board would prefer, but the recommendations were not binding on the manager. Now, I was that representative on the search committee. I was given opportunities to ask questions of all the candidates. The person hired was Ms. Marissa Crispell, and once that first major dispute was resolved, the election board and the manager settled into a mutually respectful working relationship. And based on my memory, I don't remember any significant disputes with the manager over authority. That was resolved. So to summarize my last thoughts on this, I believe it is essential to maintain the independence of the election board. If citizens are to trust in their electoral system, then those who are responsible for conducting elections must be completely free of external political influence. The current charter admirably does this. Whatever amendments are made should only enhance its independence. In particular, the selection of the election board chairperson by the 4 members appointed by council, I believe, must be retained. Language could be added that the chairperson be a registered independent, and I would say for at least 10 years. We can discuss that. I would argue not to change the election board membership to include council members or the managers as voting members. To do so raises concerns, will absolutely raise concerns about future election board decisions, and it will complicate unnecessarily how the election board operates. That's just my opinion again. Remember that as well, that when the commissioners served as the election board, they had to recuse themselves every time they stood for election. So if you place members of the council on the election board, or if you place the manager on the election board, it might be necessary, certainly it'll be necessary to remove the councilman and find a replacement. But one could argue, and I'll leave it up to the solicitor to argue this one, because the manager is hired by the council, the manager's decisions could be interpreted as being perhaps swayed by his employers, and therefore the manager should recuse himself on any elections in which the election board is members of council are standing for election. Be that as it may, I do think that having voting members, I'm sorry, members of council and the manager as voting members of the board is not a very good idea. I also believe that the qualifications to serve on the election board should be strengthened to further reduce the possibility of hyperpartisan behavior by the members of the board. To that end, I propose that anyone who has served in any leadership capacity for any party must wait at least 5 years before serving on the board, and that election board candidates must be registered in the party for a minimum of 10 consecutive years. Again, to reduce the hyperpartisanship that we all know is out there right now, and that doesn't come into the board. Okay, so that's it for my summary. I'm happy to take questions.
Oh, I'm sure we're going to have a few.
I'm sure you will.
You want to start? Ms. Malcolm?
Well, I just want to say that I thought your write-up was very detailed, and I don't have any questions. Thank
It
you.
was like writing a paper.
Thank you. I don't have any questions.
Mr. Malakari will have some questions.
Absolutely. Dr. Baldino, thank you for being here.
And Tom is fine.
I appreciate it. Over the course of the last 20 years, plus 20 years since the last time you served in this capacity, have you changed your mind on anything in particular from that original commission that you served on to today that we should focus on or can focus on, specifically regarding an elected county official, the number of council members, things like that?
As I mentioned, I disagreed with some of the things that were included in the charter that we proposed. I didn't disagree with the county manager being elected. I'm sorry, the county executive. I thought that was a good idea because I believe in checks and balances, right? I also like the idea of the county manager who would be nonpartisan and professional, and hopefully in the administration of the county's day-to-day operation, that person would not be distracted by the politics that would be going on between the executive and council. And I don't use politics as a dirty word, okay? I think politics is the normal course of business. It's how public policy is created, okay? It's compromise, it's deliberation. I know for some people, politics is like a four-letter word or something, right? But no, it's a noble profession going way back. So, but I won't go into the history there, but separating the politics as much as possible out of the administration of government is a nice idea. It's a good idea. And if you can achieve that, go for it. I did disagree with how the election board was set up. And I stated that, but I thought the current charter has as good a setup as I could have envisioned or created. I certainly would have gone with a smaller council, and I said that, right? I would have gone with, I thought 9 was okay, all at large, or 7, right? 7 or 9. I was worried that too big a council would lead to excessive bargaining, okay? And when so I got to back up. Because we created a council and an elected executive, you've got the tension between an executive and a legislature. The larger the legislative body, you actually, and the deliberations that are required to reach a decision, it actually tilts that scale a little bit in the favor of the executive because the executive is unified, it's unitary. No one to compromise with, right? So if you shrink the size of the legislative body, you end up having a body that can make decisions a bit more quickly and preferably more harmoniously. And that helps to balance off the unitary authority of the executive, the fact that the executive can act and decide things quickly.
Do you think the executive has become too powerful in the county, or is it a normal ebb and flow of politics and policy throughout Luzerne?
Okay, so again, placing our commission in context, our commission was responding and reacting to the 3-commission form of government. Our charter didn't pass, right? But only a few years later, the same kinds of problems plus kids for cash percolate up. And I think obviously the public was ready to reconsider a new government and then voted one in. Okay. So considering that the 3-county commissioner form of government fuses legislative and executive authority into one small body, and because of the nature of how these things are structured in third-class counties, you have 2 of one party, 1 of another. If the minority party member consistently disagrees, you basically have 2 people exercising legislative and executive authority. You can see where that would lead. And in the case of the commissioners who were in power when we were undergoing our study, the public wasn't too thrilled with that. Okay.
No, thank you. For the Board of Elections, which I think, you focus in on with your report a lot. Just 2 quick questions. Do you think the Board of Elections should have their own solicitor, and should they have their own budget?
We didn't. And I have been giving this some thought. And I think there's a reason for both. Okay. I could also think of reasons to not have that. That's just the way I am, right? But having the board maintain its independence over the most important aspects of its work, which is making sure that elections are held as efficiently and effectively as possible, right? That it has the resources that it needs to do that. The last thing you'd want is to have either council or an elected manager say, you want new poll books, we're not giving them to you. We're not going to fund that, right? So to allow the board to have a sufficient budget to purchase the equipment, to have that equipment serviced, all of those things, that's a good reason for having a separate budget. The solicitor, this is, again, for me, this is bringing back memories. And as I said in the document, I drew on some personal notes that I still had, lots of memories. I did get a chance to quickly review the 2003 charter that we proposed. Copy is on reserve in the archives of the Wilkes Library because I donated my copy to the library. So I ran in and looked it over. And I also did some internet research to just round out my own memories of some things. And we had a very long discussion about the Office of Law, right? And the hope was that creating that and setting it up to be available for all of the departments was a response to every row office having its own solicitor and having these solicitors argue back and forth over, my office can do this, your office can't do that. Right? So if you create a body of lawyers whose responsibilities lie with the entire county, not with one department, that seemed to us like a good idea. Now, never wasn't adopted, so we didn't get to see how it works. But there is an Office of Law now. My sense is that the current election board doesn't feel that it's being adequately served by having an attorney from the Office of Law represent its interests. And if the election board isn't given its own solicitor, then it needs to then have a budget that, when absolutely necessary, it can turn to an outside attorney for an objective legal appraisal of a particular dispute, to help resolve a particular dispute. I mean, election law is complicated. Yes, right? There are people who specialize in it. And to have someone on call, speed dial if necessary, to help resolve disputes and questions, hopefully not about whether or not it's within the scope of authority of the board to act, but whether or not the board should do something within its authority and how it should go about it. That would be useful to have. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate your idea of
Yeah.
the citizen initiative and citizen referendum too. I think that's just a very interesting idea to put forward to people as well.
The home rule rules say that home rule charters can do that, okay? Not in the state, not the state government. State constitution has nothing about that.
Which is disappointing in many regards too.
Yes.
But the last thing I have for you is just you mentioned the powers that you thought the Board of Election had back in when you served over a decade ago.
Yes.
There. Has your mind changed about what powers what the board had today as opposed to maybe 10 or 12 years ago when you got that ruling down from then Attorney General? Do you think
But no, it's Secretary of the
Secretary of Commonwealth, excuse me.
Yeah.
Do you think you actually have those powers today or would have had those powers depending upon that
Yeah.
ruling?
Yeah, I mean, the county commissioners had the authority to run elections and supervise the election director and the board. What the home rule charter did is separate those two things. So the manager takes care of all the hiring and firing and supervision of the staff. Powers of the commissioners to run elections, all of those flowed down or to the election board.
So to be clear, you think the Board of Elections has those powers that the commissioners did hold?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
That's how we understood it. And again, I admire Mr. Lawton on this. He accepted that as well. He didn't want to meddle in the elections. He just said, that man is my responsibility and he's got to go. And he took care of it. It wasn't pretty. And there was aftermath of that we don't need to go into. But yeah, he was very professional. And then when it came to the elections, he just, okay, this is your domain. You do it. As long as you did it well, didn't cause him any headaches, he was fine. And that was what we were aiming for.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Schaefer.
My first question is kind of a broad one. I just wanted to ask if there was anything that you think the most recent charter that we work on now absolutely missed, or anything that's in there that shouldn't be in there, anything that stands out in particular as like a missed opportunity.
Okay, so I'm going to take you literally and say no. I mean,
Okay.
when you say missed opportunity, that means that you should have put something in, right? No, but I would say maybe the council could be reduced in size. Okay.
That's all
And
right.
if anything else, too, I would say I should have gone back and read some of this in the current charter, but I think the amendment process needs to be clarified. Because quite honestly, I'm surprised that some of the things that were proposed by council to tweak the charter never were carried through using the amendment process, which the charter allows, right? Instead, you all were formed to do this, which is a much larger scope than just targeting a particular thing or a flaw in the charter and amending that. Just a thought.
That's all I have.
Mr. Irvin.
Thank you, Tom, for being here. One question in my mind is, do you believe there should be more inclusiveness to participate on the board by like third-party registered voters? Because, we talk about like Republicans and Democrats comprising the board, right? 2 and 2, but there are a bulk of people out there and individuals that are third-party individuals. And I know the initial board had Mr. Packard on there as
Yes.
an independent, which was great because you have a different dynamic there. But currently you could have, a third Democrat or a third Republican, which then sways the board to become a little bit more partisan.
That concerns me. Yes. So there's a reason why I think having an independent as the chair is a good idea, because I thought Mr. Packard was excellent. We had many conversations, sidebars, where we just talked political philosophy and how he kind of tried to walk the line between the Democrats and Republicans. But I will tell you that there was never a vote by the election board on any major issue that wasn't unanimous. That the 2 Democrats, and I was one of the 2 Democrats, and the 2 Republicans, we managed to determine the best course of action and unanimously supported it. And I attribute some of that also to Mr. Packard's soft hand leadership. Okay. if the board, if you were to consider adding members to the board of, say, the Libertarian Party, of which there are some members in the community, or the Constitutional Party, there are two main parties in the state that run statewide candidates, Libertarian, I believe it's Constitutionalist. If you can find significant numbers, I mean, not by significant, I'm like 5% of the voters in the county, then maybe they should have a seat on the election board, but you'd have to enlarge the election board to accommodate that. Because it's clearly the two major parties are Democrat and Republican. And without going into all of it, if we had a proportional system, the membership on the board would reflect the proportion of registered Democrats and Republicans. We don't. We just have the two major parties, and then the third parties as they exist and attempt to win office. Perhaps a compromise would be having the third, or let's call them minor parties. If you had two Democrats, two Republicans, an independent, and a representative of a minor party that could alternate on the board as a voice but no vote. Just to bring another perspective in. One of the members, and vivid memories of Betsy Summers. She was on my study commission. Some of you may know Betsy Summers. She's a very outspoken libertarian. One person on that commission, the commission I served on, we all knew her views. We all considered her position on everything because she was very forceful in stating her positions. That could work.
Mhm. Well, I know, like, the state law says that you must have at least one minority party member, right?
Right.
That's under the current code.
Right.
So,
Well,
one could see that you have one Republican, one Democrat, maybe two independents on there, and
but
of
you
course,
really do want an odd number
right,
to
right.
break ties.
Well, I mean, you would have between those four, they could choose the fifth member, somehow. I'm just thinking over the years, seeing what has transpired in this county and the differences in the way the election boards operate and your philosophies. I know for a fact, I mean, I've read a lot of the minutes from your past board when you served, and you actually publicly voted on the clerk to your board because that signature is the person that's got to go on the official results that get sent to Harrisburg. And I was looking at the 2020 election where I found documents where the two people that signed that year were not actually approved in public at a board meeting. So, their names were on documents that said clerk to the Board of Elections, but they were never solidified in a public meeting.
I can't speak to what
right.
happened in 2020.
Well, but do you believe that statutorily speaking, that all those powers that are under the election code are afforded to those board members or to any board members that serve on a board capacity? Because in my opinion, the charter is how we comprise the board.
Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
So I think all the inherent powers should be afforded to whoever is sitting in those chairs. Right.
Yes.
I mean, and it is a quasi judicial board by nature. So it's under election code. They have the ability to look at things in a different light. It's
Okay,
not just to
so
conduct elections. It's
maybe-
also to also deal with voter registration issues too.
Right. Yes.
That's under Title 53, right?
Right.
So that basically a council can't diminish or enlarge powers that are stated in Title 53 for boards of elections, because all boards of elections are supposed to be uniform across the Commonwealth as far as their powers and duties.
Exactly. As far as their powers are concerned.
Right.
How they're constituted, the numbers of members on the board, they can vary,
That can vary, yes,
especially under home rule charters.
correct. It's the charter basically just tells us how they get there. But once they get there, they have all the powers and duties
That
afforded under law.
flow from state government,
Correct.
right? And the US Constitution as it's relevant.
That's my belief. And
And I would say I agree with that.
And I've seen some issues where our administrative code here dictates and says that your clerk to the board is the division head of admin services. But under state election law, it says the board can choose their own clerk. So there's a conflict there, which council has never addressed. You know,
Okay.
so in theory, you could have two different clerks, one that's produced by the admin code, and then one that's produced by
Okay.
what's in statute.
You're getting very
I'm
granular.
going deep
And,
into
and
the
that's
weeds.
fine, but
I
you're
thought
doing
maybe-
it on the current charter, which I am not
Right.
as conversational or
Okay.
conversant with as maybe I should be, right? But those kinds of issues didn't come up when I was on the board.
Okay.
And as I said, we were trying to be very careful in how we approached our business. We were the first board. We didn't want to appear going off in some crazy direction that would cause problems for the future, right? For future boards. And we also wanted to maintain good working relationship with the manager, especially the way it got started. You know, we had hope for better, and eventually it did settle. Things did settle, and we were then very fortunate, in my opinion, to have Ms. Crispell serve as our election director.
And she was also your clerk, though, too, I think, at the time. I think you voted on her as your clerk.
As the clerk, yes.
Right, to
Thank
the
you.
board. So
Yes.
that added to some continuity between the board and the Bureau's office. And that's really what I'm looking at, you know, is the continuity portion. Because, you know,
But she didn't vote.
no, she
right?
didn't vote. No,
Yeah.
no. She was your clerk
Right.
to the board,
Yes.
you know,
She came to all the meetings and took
Correct.
notes.
took notes. And so there was some continuity between the election staff
Mhm.
and the board,
Yes.
which over the years has eroded, in
Okay.
my opinion, you know,
All right.
from being on council. And
I won't try to argue
Right,
that
right,
because
right.
I'm,
so, but I want to see people work together. I mean, ultimately, that's the goal, is to, how do we bring that continuity back in a
I'm-
peaceful
I
manner
couldn't agree with you more.
where people aren't so cantankerous
Yes.
toward one another?
Yes.
You know, knowing that the Bureau needs money to operate.
Yes.
You need a council to vote on that money, and you need the manager to execute on the initiatives by council and the board.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm looking at. You know, how can we make this better and how can we improve it from a
Yes.
high level? I mean, we obviously don't want to dig too far into the weeds, but
Right. As Ms. Shedlock referenced in her comparative analysis of the various charters, you can get very detailed in the charter about specifying things. And if you were to do that, you could be unnecessarily tying the hands of people who might want just a little more room, or in a way that limits their creativity in a good way,
Mhm.
right? If you're too broad, you run the risk of then people trying to exercise too much authority. So there's that very fine line. You know,
Yeah, what
creating a government is a tricky business.
what I found
as I learned.
interesting was that the charter that commission that you were sitting on had an elected executive, right? And then a county manager. So two different people,
Yes,
not just one.
yes. But you understand, the thinking was the county executive is the political arm of the executive,
Mhm.
right? That person has a policy agenda and goes into council, much like Wilkes-Barre City, right? There's a mayor, council, and there's a city manager, right? The manager doesn't go in and argue public policy. That's the mayor's job.
Mhm.
And so having a professional, nonpartisan manager was a way of assuaging the fears of people who worried about creating this hugely authoritarian individual as county executive. No, the goal was to create an executive who can take a county-wide view of things, even though all the council members were, well, no, I take a step back. Our council had districts, 6 of them,
Mhm.
right? So the executive would be the one person who has the entire county's perspective. And there were 3 at-large districts, but another bird's eye view, if you will, of county, and taking into consideration the largest possible community, entire county, in arguing for a public policy. That's what we were aiming for.
Okay.
And
Now-
we thought it was a worthwhile step to try.
And I know for a fact, even under the Commissioner form of government, they had a county manager as well. I know Mr. Brace, Bill Brace served as a
Yes.
county manager.
Yes.
Doug Pape was a manager too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they did run some of the day-to-day.
But again,
Under
if
the
you remember,
commission.
if you remember back then, the manager really did owe his job.
To two people.
Yes,
Correct.
right. So difficult to be completely nonpartisan and objective. And there were also people who served in that position, and I'm not saying that they weren't competent, but some of them, maybe some of the earlier ones, lacked professional training and experience that we try to include as language in the qualifications for the manager. Okay,
Mhm. Thank you.
you're welcome.
If I'm correct, I think Mr. Pape and Mr. Brace were chief clerk. They weren't called managers, they were chief clerk, and they did answer to the commissioners. I have a couple questions for you, if I may.
Sure.
Why do you think your efforts were not successful?
I did give you a brief summary of that. Okay. And we had, at Wilkes, we used to do polls. We stopped by this point, but it was very clear from looking at the voting in the county that the parts of the county that turned out in largest numbers against the proposal, the proposed charter, were at the southern end of the county. And several members of our commission came from the southern end of the county, and they were pushing very hard for districts. Folks down there wanted their own district. We tried, but there's this sticky thing called one person, one vote. Okay, and you have to have districts of equal and really, really close to equal populations. Right? We did the best we could. Not satisfactory. Now, maybe with a few 5,000 or 10,000 more people in Hazleton, given that the population's come back a bit, you might be able to get a district that encompasses Hazleton and Hazel Township, but I don't know. And would that be satisfactory? Okay. That and the sitting commissioners and the commissioners who were running to replace the sitting commissioners all were against it. We had no budget as a commission to advertise in favor of our position. We sought out people who would speak out on our behalf, but we weren't buying TV ads. We didn't solicit contributions, at least that I remember anyway, to buy ads in favor of the charter. So, 52-48, not too bad. It wasn't an overwhelming defeat, right? But
so obviously districts were one thing that caused some problems as far as
yes,
get approval.
Yes.
Okay. What'd you do with the row offices? You said you combined some?
Well, pretty much the same idea that the current charter had and incorporated in its charter. All of those row offices, especially, I won't go detail, but some of them were out of date. Okay, there were overlapping responsibilities and all of that. Now, this is where my memory fails me, but I remember distinctly that there were disputes between a couple of our offices of whose responsibility it was to do this or that, and who was holding something back. And so that kind of stuff, we thought, well, let's consolidate these functions. Stop thinking about offices. Let's think about what the functions are. So administrative services, you just take all the things that relate to the law and put them in one department. All the things that deal with general services, and you put them in one department. So yeah, it streamlined things. And it was a matter of trying to create efficiencies.
Which I think the current charter does something.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
The charter that you proposed, your commission proposed, what were the information or details on budget?
So there was, I didn't spend a lot of time with that, but the charter, there were several members of the commission on which I sat who were laser focused on money, especially taxes, okay, and spending, but I would say taxes first. So we had several meetings devoted specifically to finance and appropriations. And so I give a lot of credit to the PEL, and they worked out language to incorporate all the kind of details that we wanted to make the budgeting, financing, and appropriations process as transparent as possible. Okay. And if you go, again, I wish I had spent more time with it, but if you looked at our charter proposal, pages were devoted to budgeting and finance and taxation, because that was one of the things that drove the demand for a study commission. The county was constantly in debt, right? And you'd go 2 or 3 years without a tax increase, and then bam, you'd have this 10% or whatever tax increase, and people would go crazy. And rightly so, right?
Well, the debt didn't stop there, that's for sure.
But no, it doesn't. But the people who were running to take over the commissioner's office, Greg Skrepenak, Todd von der Heide, and Stephen Urban, your dad, right? Jay Urban. Hey, sorry. Just to make sure they get the distinction, right? But they were arguing that they would get control of the budget. And I remember this distinctly, how Mr. von der Heide was talking about the budget there's a structural deficit in the budget that needs to be corrected, and that they would take care of it.
Well, that didn't quite work out.
Yeah. But to credit the current the current charter and the councils that have taken over, that the deficits have been shrunk considerably, and credit should be given where credit's due. So.
Yeah, I think that the debt situation, very definitely, the councils deserve a lot of credit.
Yep.
You know, they took a debt of about $465 million when you were part of the election board. And I think the report last week was 165 million.
Not bad.
No, significant.
Yes.
Do you happen to have, you mentioned that memo that you received from the secretary?
Do I have it?
Yeah.
No. I honestly, goodness, I don't know where it is. And I create what I wrote there came from memory.
Okay.
All right. But we did get a response, and it was essentially the manager does this, the board does this.
No, I think that memo would be very helpful.
If you can find it. Yeah. I don't know where it would
unfortunately,
be.
Mr. Packer is not available.
Right. Yes. And I don't know what happened to the official records. Okay. I kept some of my papers, including my copy of one of the last drafts. And I had some handwritten notes in it. And then when I gave a bunch of stuff to the Wilkes Library, it went into the archive, but I didn't have a copy of the memo.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very
You're welcome.
informative. Did a lot of work, and we appreciate it very much.
I'm retired. I had some time.
Well, it doesn't look like you're so retired with some of your work that's.
Well, yeah, well, yes. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Williams?
I do have a copy of my presentation. I'll leave it right over here. You want to make a copy?
Yeah, you can. Ms. Lawrence will make copies for people.
Good evening, commissioners, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I want to thank Dr. Baldino. I have great respect and admiration for him, and I agree with everything he said. After much more thought and reflection on my initial recommendations that I emailed to all of you, I believe these recommendations improve upon what I originally shared. My thoughts and input are based not only upon my experience as chair of the Board of Elections, but also based upon my observations and experience of the Board of Elections prior to my appointment. All of my recommendations are given with what I believe is in the best interest of the citizens of the county, good government that is of, by, and for the people. I would like to start with the first Board of Elections that Dr. Baldino was on. When the Home Rule Charter was implemented in 2012, there were some significant differences between that board and today's board. When the first Board of Elections was in place, it was nowhere near the hyperpartisan and politically divisive climate as the current board's political climate is. Elections are now under the microscope nationally, and the Board of Elections all Board of Elections face many outside pressures and much litigation. Mail-in ballots started in June of 2020 and changed the election process profoundly. With it, the Board of Elections post-election adjudication process increased dramatically. The first board approved the Election Bureau's budgets and contracts, large and small, despite not having its own budget. I do not understand why the first board had this authority and the present board does not. The first board didn't have a budget either. In October of 2019, Act 77 was enacted into law, and the first mail ballots would be utilized for the May 2020 primary election. Then came COVID. The primary was postponed until June of 2020. Mail ballot use soared. Polling places had to be consolidated due to a lack of poll workers willing to work and less people planning to go to the polls, instead using the mail ballots. This was also the first election the county had planned to use its new Dominion machines, and only the second election for a new director of elections, with the former having resigned in October of 2019. Paper ballots ended up being used in place of the new ballot marking devices. The November 2020 presidential election brought nationwide allegations of mail ballot fraud, ballot drop box fraud, voting machine fraud, vote counting fraud, etc. In Luzerne County, military ballots were mistakenly discarded, and a resident signed his deceased mother's name on a submitted absentee ballot application. I started listening in on the Board of Elections meetings for the first time right after that election. I was asked by a friend if I ever listened to any of the meetings. I said no, was not involved in county government in any way. But I started listening in, and I was appalled at many of the public comments that I heard in the treatment of the then election board members. Not long after, in February of 2021, during a meeting of the election board, of the three members, there were only three members at that time, voted to appoint a county council member, Mr. Urban, as chair of the election board. He accepted the position despite Chief Solicitor Crocomo telling him it was a violation of the charter. Shortly after, County Council unanimously voted to remove him and the two board members who voted him in from their positions on the board. This prompted me to submit an ethics code violation complaint. As you may recall, after months of work, the ACE Commission made the determination that there was in fact a violation of the charter and ethics code and made penalty recommendations for the county council to vote on. The vote was 5-3 with county council rejecting the penalties. Between this situation and what I considered to be way too much involvement within board meetings by some county council members, I had grave concerns for the integrity of the Luzerne County Board of Elections. These two things were what prompted me to apply for the chair position. I stated during my Board of Elections interview that I had guidelines and rules for myself if I were to be appointed. I keep these commitments on the cover of my board meetings folder. 1, follow the law or laws working for a free, fair, and accurate election. Transparency, make all decisions through the lens of nonpartisanship, and encourage a culture of continued improvement. Since my term started in April of 2021, there has been much turnover in the Election Bureau leadership and multiple election mishaps over multiple elections. In the 3.5 years that I have been on, there have been 5 different county managers or acting county managers, 4 different heads of administrative services, 6 different directors of election, 5 different deputy directors of elections, 4 different chief solicitors or acting chief solicitors, and 3 different board of election solicitors. There's no one that's the same since I started except for one, and that's now County Manager Crocomo, who had left for a period of time while I've been on the board. I believe that the increase in turnover factored into election mistakes and issues, and that the mistakes and issues factored into the turnovers. In addition, I believe that a lack of experience and knowledge of some of those hired for the director and deputy director positions and a lack of written standards of procedures in place were also contributing factors to both the turnovers and mistakes. Directors and deputy directors of elections across the state and nation were leaving those positions in droves after the November 2020 presidential election, and finding well-qualified and experienced individuals for those positions has become increasingly difficult. Throughout all of this came a pile-on of what I call the blame game. A whole lot of finger pointing by county council members, bureau leadership, the Office of Law, county manager, board of election members, and the public. Everybody had a part in it. It also seemed that for some, their political affiliation increased or decreased the level of blame that was placed on them. Fast forward to the present, the Election Bureau is back on good solid ground with experienced leadership at the helm. There are now written standards of procedure in place for all election processes. The Board of Elections has bylaws in place for the first time. There are written MOUs in place between the Bureau Board for the budget contracts and purchases. Written standards of procedures are now in place for all board adjudication procedures. Comprehensive and detailed adjudication meeting agenda templates have been created. When I first started on the board, none of this was available or in place. On another note, in the 3.5 years since I have been on the board has been involved in 3 lawsuits against other county government entities. But they were all against the board. They were all placed against the board. The board didn't seek these out. And this is without having our own independent legal representation. First, the board was sued by both the DA's office and the county council over the board's determination that there had to be a special election for the office of DA and that the term was for 2 years. Second, the county council sued the board over the ballot question, addressing multiple changes to the Board of Elections. And lastly, most recently, the ballot drop box suit with the county manager and board both being named defendants, but with opposing positions. The Government Study Commission is in a position to help address issues that have come up regarding the roles, authority, and composition of the Board of Elections. Please be on alert for anyone desiring to politically align the board in one party's favor or anyone looking for administrative control of the board. The Board of Elections must be protected and guarded against these types of things ever happening. The Board of Elections has a duty to the citizens of the county for the nonpartisan facilitation of free, fair, accurate elections for all citizens in the county. And so here are my recommendations for the Board of Elections section of the charter. 1, I think it is necessary for your independent solicitor to help you and everyone understand what powers and duties of county boards in section 302 of the election code can be administered by the Bureau of Elections or county manager under a home rule charter government. There are some who are of the opinion that only the Board of Elections has these powers and duties. I am not of that belief. Although there are some powers and duties that are solely the role and authority of the board, I believe that as long as the conduct of elections is following state law, the Election Bureau, county manager can be delegated by ordinance, administrative code to administer many aspects of the election processes outlined under powers and duties of county boards, under the oversight of the Board of Elections in a home rule charter form of government. Again, this is an area for your solicitor to best assist you with. 2, I believe this is very important to me. I believe that the tension and discord between the Board of Elections, county manager, county council, and Office of Law is a critical concern needing to be resolved in order to make for a more cooperative effort between the entities and prevention of interference and abuse of power. I also feel strongly that there's a need to put further guardrails in place to ensure that the board is fulfilling its role in a nonpartisan manner in the best interest of all the citizens of the county. This needs to be tightened up. I believe these concerns can be addressed by 4 things. A, the Board of Elections having its own separate outside legal representation. B, adding the county manager to the Board of Elections in a non-voting capacity. C, adding 2 bipartisan members of the county council to the board in only a non-voting capacity. And D, requiring the chair to be an independent. I feel strongly that these changes would provide for more of a spirit of cooperation, transparency, but most importantly, trust in the county's election oversight process within county government and with the public. How to best set this up in order for it to be in the best interest of the citizens of the county and in order to prevent the possibility of abuse of power, conflicts of interest, or even the appearance of either on the board would need to be fleshed out. And that would require multiple sections of the charter being changed. Council, under council, Board of Elections, ABCs, county manager, office of law, etc. These are my other recommendations. County manager, I already said, in a non-voting capacity. Independent outside legal representation for the Board of Elections. 2 bipartisan county council members in a non-voting capacity. The county manager and council members cannot be chair. The chair must be an independent and must be appointed by the 4 voting member board majority through the currently defined public interview process in the Board of Elections bylaws. Keep same appointment process of the 4 volunteer citizen members, which is a county council process outlined in the charter. Reduce the number of years the citizens applicants must not have been the contractors of the county or employees of the county, that one clause. I think 4 years seems excessive. Allowance for poll workers to be appointed to the citizen-held seats on condition of vacating their poll worker position. Keep the 5-year party affiliation requirement for all citizen members appointed to the council and add that requirement for the chair. The 2 county council members, non-voting members, must vacate their seats upon running for re-election on council or running for any other office, and council would appoint a replacement, but replacement must be from the same party affiliation. A clerk hired by the Board of Elections, a budget line to be added for the Board of Elections for the outside counsel, clerk for the board, and office supplies and equipment and any other needs. And lastly, an office space to be provided for the Board of Elections and board clerk to manage agendas, legal notices, minutes, website posts, and storage of Board of Election documents and mail reception for the Board of Elections. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you for your report. I thought it was very thorough, but I wonder if you could help me understand your feelings about having county council and county manager on the Board of Elections.
Okay, I'll address them separately because I have
Okay.
separate reasons for them. So, and some are the same. I'll start with the county manager. And this has come up frequently, where the board makes decisions. We publicly deliberate during public meetings with the director or the deputy director of elections there. And then things change after the meeting, where the county manager would say, well, no, that's not how it's going to be. And it's happened on more than one occasion. And my thinking is this, let's all sit at the table. Let's make this a team effort. County manager, the 2 bipartisan members of council, and let's all publicly discuss these issues together publicly so that we're all aware of what's going on and things don't change after the meeting's over. As for the county council members, there was so much, a lot of it was pointed at me because I'm the one that leans, and the chair will lean the Board of Elections the way it's set up at this point, one way or the other, depending on what their political party affiliation is. So when things went wrong, it was always the chair should resign. It's you, that you're the problem. And if there's a majority on council that is different than what's on board, you've seen this in the paper, in the media. So my thinking is the transparency of having a couple council members on, because they seem to want to be on it. They seem to want to have more input. And this would give them that opportunity to give input, but also it would take the council itself would know they have a couple representatives there with their voice. But I really do feel strongly it has to be bipartisan. It can't be any one party just only represented, because I don't think the public would want that. I think the public would have more trust if they knew one from each party was represented. And the county manager being there. So I'm looking at as, okay, there's this problem of all this tension with the board in many ways. Okay, let's make it a team effort then. Let's all sit down at the table together and work more cooperatively going forward with it, because I have been living this tension for quite a few years now, 3.5. And it's very difficult as the chair to be in this position. And I think of whoever's next, it's very, very difficult. It's one of the most difficult things I've done in my life.
Okay.
So I hope that helps give you an understanding of, I've put a lot of thought into this, a lot of reflection on how to have a more cooperative effort, less tension, get this, it's always in the media. And I don't think the public really, I think they want to see these issues resolved.
Yeah.
And to go forward together, working together for elections. And I think this is the solution I've come up with.
I wonder, and I don't even know if this is possible. I might be naive to think this, but is there a way that you could be more independent without having to have like the county manager come and change channels on you after you've already made a decision?
I don't know. I don't understand how we could be more independent.
Well, I'm just curious about I guess the flow chart about it all. So the county manager has the final say in how things go, but they don't, I'm hearing that you're saying that they don't take into consideration, or maybe you're feeling like if they were in on the decision-making, that maybe things would be different.
Yeah, I think that it'd be really helpful for the county manager to be a part of the meetings, to be not in a voting capacity, because the Board of Elections oversees elections. So I think for the trust of the citizens of the county, I think saying that they can't vote, but they are really important. The county manager is also overseeing the elections. There's an importance in with this charter setup that we have. A lot of things are separated in that the bureau and the bureau leadership manages the budget and the employees. And so if the board makes a decision on policy, there has to be this cooperation for that whole thing to be followed through. And if there isn't, then there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what we're seeing right now. So to make it a more cooperative effort, I think it's really important for the county manager to be a part of the equation and to be there and to be in the discussions, to say, the concerns and in a public forum, in a public meeting. I think it would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ritzik.
Thank you for coming today. As you heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Baldino, but he had mentioned that, when the first board had taken over, there was this kind of assumption that the Board of Elections would retain all of the powers, vested in both the executive and legislative functions to which the commissioners held. As we found out, that wasn't the case. But looking at, how the Board of Elections goes about its business now, do you think that balance of power should be shifted in the way that the election board has more jurisdiction over budget, hiring, firing, the all-encompassing, let's say, role of managing the elections versus the separation of powers and the divide between, overseeing the elections and the administration of personnel?
Yeah, I know I sent you an email with a lot of that, and I can share on that. I feel very differently than what's been articulated, because I think that a home rule charter form of government can separate out a lot of the administrative duties, and the election bureau and their leadership can do those. And I think to ask a 5-citizen volunteer election board to manage the whole budget, how would that be done? For one thing, that's the role of the county manager, the election bureau, and then it gets presented to the legislative body, which is the council, for their approval. I am all for that. We set up an MOU. We put that together, the bureau and the board. And so what we do to address that, because some members said they wanted all that control, but I think this is really a great cooperative effort of what we put together in that. And it's happening at Wednesday's meeting. The bureau presents the budget before they bring it to council, to us. We review it. We get to ask questions. And then what we do is we give it a vote in support of or a vote not in support of. We can't approve it. That's not our role because we don't have a budget. And this way, county council knows, they would know by the media, or if they want to look at our minutes or they're, tuning into our meetings, the position of the board. And so, and then purchases and contracts, anything over 25,000 has to go before the county council for approval, right? Well, we have that also in the MOU. Anything that is a large contract like that would be presented to us in support of, not in support of vote. That's how it goes. So we built that in. So it's kind of, I think it's a wonderful cooperative effort. And it's really, I don't see it as our role to manage the budget, 5 volunteer citizens doing that. I don't see it as our role to do the hiring or the firing or anything with employees. I think that's the business of the administration. And I don't think, and I believe that home rule charters can set that up that way. And there are certain things that the Office of Law will tell us when it is only the authority of the board to do certain things, and only the board can do that. A lot of it is formality, like certifying an election, these types of things. As you know, now ballot drop boxes, but I'm not going to get into that. But a lot of it can be done by the bureau and the administration. And again, it just goes back to, I think cooperation is the word. And I remember hearing Chair Lombardo in the very beginning of the year in January, he talked about kind of a theme he wanted this year was cooperation. And that struck me. And I thought that is a great theme and that is a great thought. And so a lot of that word is really within my talk here. And I think that is the direction to go in. But I just think a lot of what is in Title 25 or the election code, that is the powers and duties of the Board of Elections for a home rule charter, can be done by the election bureau or the county administration.
So largely, I mean, you would say from an administrative standpoint, let's say the improvements over the last several years, regardless of what the charter maybe says or not, have been very successful, at least in your ability to outline process procedures and move the ball forward from a situation to where, there was largely a situation viewed as having a lot of dysfunction to now one to where you have processes and timelines and, dysfunction takes a long time to get out of because we're still pulling our way out of $465 million in debt. But, by all metrics, seeing that, okay, we've gone from a bad place to one that's maybe not where we want to be, but less bad is a lot better than bad. And, that's how you eventually get to good. And that's kind of the direction you've been going in.
Sure. And, you have to remember when 2020, the mail ballots were implemented, you had a changeover in director at the Bureau. And what the Pennsylvania Department of State didn't provide all the counties with a notebook on how to pre-canvass, how to adjudicate. They all had different machines too. And a lot of these different voting machines do it a different way, the adjudication process. So the director changed right after November 2020. There was a new one in the primary of 2021, brand new, no experience. Nothing, because this was all brand new stuff to begin with. So nothing was able to be put in place. So now, 4 years later, almost 4 years later, there are all these things in place. It's been a rocky road, but and then with all that, there's been this tension of really hyper partisan environment that we're all living in. And a lot of mistakes did happen, and I explained why. And there were many contributing factors. Unfortunately, you had a lot of turnover. You had new machines. You didn't have things in place. It was the kind of the perfect storm. And then there was a lot of finger pointing, and there was a lot of blame. It was a lot of frustration on a lot of people's part. And that was the bottom line. It was the frustration. And so, but despite all that, somehow the board and bureau has still been plugging away, trying to get these things in place, and they've now got it there.
One more question, then I'm done. And this is, I think I'm going to ask the same question to the county manager as well. But do you think the current structure with the division heads and some of the compensation that's been set and some of that has been a limiting factor possibly in attracting talent, to the election board, maybe retaining people, or do you think it's maybe a little bit more than that?
I say that one more time.
So do you said there's a lot of turnover in the department and
well, in the board,
in the board
and in the election bureau, yes,
in both. And so I'm speaking more to the bureau, and maybe this is more of an appropriate question to ask to the manager. But do you think that has something to do with the level of compensation that's kind of set by our executive structure, or do you see it more as a combination of several things between people aren't going to want to do this job because it's not a lot of money and it's a lot of flack, and it's just your perspective on that?
Well, it's a tough job. There aren't a lot of people who want to be a director of elections or a deputy director of elections nowadays. It's hard to find people that are going to work in that type of environment under that microscope. It's a lot to ask. You have to be a really strong person. You have to be a go-getter. You really have to, there's a lot there. I don't think I would ever want either of those positions ever in my life. And I give kudos to Ms. Cook and Mr. Hahn. I think they're doing a really, really great job. Again, I think the turnover and the changeover, it was the circumstances of the time, and it was happening all over, not just in Luzerne County, as all over the state. There was an article about that, a lot of election directors leaving, but also nationwide. There's a lot of pressure in those positions. Money-wise, is that a factor? I mean, it could be, but I mean, I'm not as familiar with what the other counties are paying, so that I'd leave up to you. But I mean, it's a pretty thankless job for the most part, unless things go really, then everybody's thanking you. But with elections and mail ballots and voting machines and all the processes, there's so many things going on for an election to get through an election that there's bound to be some minor mistakes or things that happen that that's not unusual anymore, because there's so many moving parts within an election. So when that happens, but it gets on the front page of the newspaper, of course, and we all know where that's gone. Yeah.
So thank you for being here. Mr. Ritzik, his questions kind of answer a lot of what I wanted to ask about the powers that you have with the board and the bureau, because I do think the Board of Elections is the reason the study commission has been called by the voters. It's the reason that it got brought up by the council to be put on the ballot. The Board of Elections has been a source of tension, I think. However, in recent memory, I think a lot of the dysfunction has been more about perception by bad actors in the public than it has been anything else. So I want to say kudos to you for trying to remedy many of those things with your processes and bylaws that you put in place. I do have a question that piqued my interest. Where do you guys store records now for the Board of Elections?
There is, well, I shouldn't say that. Like, I know that when we do the notice to cure list, notification to cure, we give those to the election director and they store them someplace within the election bureau. I'm not talking about election bureau documents. We're just talking strictly about board documents.
Yeah, I'm referencing your last recommendation, storage of Board of Election documents.
Well, the minutes and the agendas are on the website. Anything else beyond that, I would say that each and every individual board member has their own documents that they they keep it in their own home.
Okay, I was just wondering, I mean, you said, you'd like a place to store those things, your own office and, the county finding some space for you. So I guess that's the sense of what you're trying to say to us.
Yeah.
I
I have a lot of documents.
can imagine.
And I think it would be important for those to be in a Board of Election office where, all of the agendas on paper, notes, litigation folder, things that I've, been deposed, these things. I think that the county should have them, and they should have a space for the Board of Elections to store these, to have these, to maybe go to if you had a question like about that letter that was sent from the Secretary of State. They would be there, and there would be a clerk who would oversee them, that you would turn them over and they would file them, and that clerk would be aware of where things are for the board.
Like an archive almost.
Yeah.
And then my last question is this, out of all of your recommendations, would you say the need for an independent solicitor is at the top of your list of things for the Board of Elections?
Absolutely. Yeah, we, in the last 3.5 years, I believe the board is the only entity that's been sued by other county entities. And we've had the universal office of law that everybody else has had. We've had times on the Board of Election where we disagreed with the office of law's opinion. And okay, I'm going to give you an example, the ballot question that didn't make it to the ballot. I think that could have made it if that issue had been addressed, because we were struggling on the board with that question and felt it was more than one question, that it was confusing to the voters, and we were trying to help reconcile that. One member also questioned if it was a change in the form of government, but the main thing was we all unanimously were saying it's more than one question. And we had a situation a year prior to that when Pittston City had proposed a question, and I said, this is 4 questions to me. And it was just, oh, we'll send it back to the solicitor, and it came back as 4 questions. It went on the ballot, and that was that. I don't think they all passed. I don't remember. But if that was what we were asking, could it need, it's more than one question. And that was it. So let's go with that. And I felt that we were basically told that it is what it is. Go with it. And we asked for, could we get an outside opinion? And the answer was, you don't have a budget. That was that. So the story after that was, I don't think we really knew what to do it. So we didn't do anything with it. And then we were sued to do something or have somebody else come in and do it for us. That was kind of the position. And then the court said, well, they haven't even voted. So we had to go back and vote. And we unanimously, all 5 of us voted to reject it because we felt it was more than one question. That was the bottom line. And so that ended up coming back to council and being rescinded. And the next motion on that agenda, if you look back, was to add this Government Study Commission question. And so that I agree with you. I don't know that you needed to be here at all. That could have gone through with multiple questions, and you might not even be here today if maybe we were allowed to get an outside opinion and they said, well, let's work on these maybe questions, breaking this down and doing this. So, but I think that it could have been resolved differently. That's what I'm getting at. And maybe it would have been if we had our own outside attorney. I also think that our own outside attorney would give 5 volunteer citizens a little more respect, in that it would create a checks and balances. I think maybe the 3 commissioner type system, they seem, they're well regarded when they're the Board of Elections. But for some reason, I feel that 5 volunteer citizens, well, so if there wasn't an independent solicitor for the board, the Office of Law, which would oversee the Bureau, may come together with that solicitor with conversations on things before they were just done.
Understood. Thank you.
Mr. Schaefer.
I had kind of maybe a best case scenario, worst case scenario, depending on what your party is question. Mr. McGinley, I believe at one point you were the only Dem on county council, correct?
Last 2 years.
Yeah.
I served that.
So my question for this is, how would that work in terms of your proposal for 2 county councilmen? I mean, I believe Mr. McGinley was term limited, so he wasn't running. But if he'd been running, he would have had to step down, and then you would not have you see where I'm going? You would not have a Dem to serve on the commission. So how would you handle it then?
Yeah, I thought about that too.
Okay.
I think there are 2 things you could consider. You go with what you have until if and when the council would have someone from that other political affiliation. Remember, they're in non-voting capacity. Or 2, you could say, unless there's 2, there's none.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And you mentioned a few things about the Bureau of Elections. In particular, you mentioned different treatment based on political party. Can you go into more detail about that? I believe you said.
Yeah. Oh,
Or
yeah.
if there's any protections you think that are needed to help prevent that, because as Mr. Baldino and others have talked about, like nepotism, favoritism have been big focuses of study commissions in the past. So I wanted to get your opinion on that.
So are you talking about how I lean it 3 Dem, 2?
No, the Bureau of Elections and how people are treated differently, you said, based on their party in hiring.
Well, what I was saying was, depending on your political affiliation, sometimes when things went wrong, whether you're on the board, maybe on the Bureau, that might have equated into more finger pointing. I got a sense of that to my, depending on what the Election Bureau director's political affiliation was, I'd see a lot in the media, or I'd hear a lot about in meetings, people even saying this in public comment. It's because they're a Republican or they're a Democrat and got to get rid of them, or got to get more Republicans in the Election Bureau, more Democrats in the election. These types of comments I did hear. I heard it, about myself. And I think that's why it's very important that I think an independent in the chair position would be a very important move for the trust of the citizens of the county, and to take that narrative out, or even to take that trying to game the system out of trying to get a Republican in that seat or a Democrat in that seat. I hear already right now, people can't wait until I leave. And there are people wanting to get a Republican in that seat to end ballot drop boxes. We can talk about this. I'm being honest with you here. We all know this is an elephant in the room. But so I hear all these things and I say, that's a shame that everybody's trying to work the Board of Elections politically for political partisan motivations, when the Board of Elections role is nonpartisan facilitation of elections, free, fair, and accurate elections. That's the role this board is supposed to have. And we need to, I think, rein that in and really emphasize that. And there are many ways that can be increased. The ABC's committee that interviews candidates, the county council, they could make a strong statement saying, going forward, we want that Board of Elections to be nonpartisan, and really emphasize that and put that into their interviews, these types of things, questions about that, and put an emphasis on it. But I really do think an independent in that seat is the answer to all of that, to take that gaming the election board. And it's not just the public. I'm hearing that from some elected officials even. Yeah.
That was going to be my follow-up question. Is it just like, as Mr. Malakari was saying, like bad people with bad intentions in the public saying, oh, they're doing it because they're Democrat, they're doing it because they're Republican, or are you hearing this from government officials as well?
I've heard government officials,
Okay.
county council telling me I should resign. They've come to public meetings, especially over the ballot drop box issue.
Okay. That's all the questions I had.
Mr. Urban.
Hi, Denise. So Department of State, I know they don't provide legal advice, right? They're just pretty much a keeper of records at the state level. And so I know maybe, back in the day, Mr. Baldino, Dr. Baldino, that they may have offered a letter back in the day, but I know I've contacted the DOS in more recent years, and they basically said, we're not going to offer any legal advice. They might give you some advice, but it won't be legal in a sense, because they're more, like I said, mostly keepers of records from the state level, petitions, campaign expense reports, things like that. I mean, obviously they offer quote unquote guidance to counties, but it's not really stern legal advice.
Well, they'll do directives too.
Right.
Yeah.
When I look at and this was an issue with some of the language in the charter, it says at the time, and this is under 804B, at the time of their appointment, each member of the Board of Elections and Registration appointed by County Council shall have been a member of the same political party continuously for at least 5 years and shall remain a member of that party during his or her office. I brought this up when I was on council, that is a form of age discrimination. Anybody that's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 cannot serve on our Board of Elections, but you can get elected as a mayor at 18 years old, or even a county councilman at 18, but you're not allowed to serve on our Board of Elections till you hit at least 23. That's provided you're registered on day one of your 18th birthday. So we're already limiting a significant portion of the population, people that might be college students, that might be poli-sci majors, that might be interested in politics, but we're saying in Luzerne County, you're not welcome on our Board of Elections. So please think about that, my colleagues. That is strict language, at least 5 years. So 18 to 23, you're out. Correct.
I feel very strongly about keeping that. And I've heard you say that before.
Right.
I don't think it's age discrimination. I wouldn't call it that. The motivation, I believe, that the charter framers had for putting that in was to really make sure that that person is really politically aligned that way. And 5 years is a good amount. I like 10 years too. I'd go for 10 years that Dr. Baldino said. I'd be okay with either of those. I would never go under 5 years. And I think it's very important to make sure that that person is actually, 5 years, you're going to be out of primaries for 5 years if you're choosing to just to register as that party so you can get on the Board of Elections. There are people who would consider registering just for the matter of 2 years to get on the Board of Elections. And I wouldn't doubt that would happen, or that could happen. And I think this prevents that. And I think it's very, very important to keep it.
I mean, there are reservations though, because we do have one of the youngest state rep in this county, right? He serves in Harrisburg. He's very intelligent. Not saying that there aren't people that are intelligent at 18 years old to 23 that could serve in this capacity. And obviously the county council would be that check and balance, because they can remove individuals off of a board, for malfeasance or whatever. Obviously, in my situation, I don't believe they had the power, because it should have been a quo warranto action. They weren't the appointing body, but we can digress, and I don't want to get back into that and rehash that. As far as record storage facility, we have one in the county in Hanover Township. So why hasn't, this would be a question, why hasn't management, or you in particular, or your board come up with an idea of sending those records down to that Hanover Township record storage facility?
Well, I use them all still.
Okay.
I refer back to them all the time with while I'm on the Board of Elections. So I like to refer back to different meeting agendas, minutes. And so I go to them all the time. And if and when my time comes to go off the board, I will certainly find out how I can get them to whoever they should get them. But I think that an office space for the Board of Elections would not just be for retention of records. I think if the board were to have its own clerk, first off, I think it's very hard on the Election Bureau leadership to also now be doing all of our minutes, and they don't do the agendas. I do it for them because it's so much. They're so busy. They don't have a large staff, and to be doing the legal notices, all this stuff for us while they're doing all the work. I think it would be important to have somebody separate to do that who would also have a space for storage, a space for the board to go to when there's adjudication. We don't have a space to go to take a break, or if we need to do something, whatever, take a rest, have our lunch. There is no space. A space for our solicitor to meet with us in executive session where we could go. So I think that the space itself, there are other things besides just record retention. I think the Board of Elections, and if you look at the agendas on the agenda webpage, have you seen how many the Board of Elections have? It's similar to the county council. They're probably the two most active groups that meet in our county right now, and it's significant. Problem, the paperwork. The other thing is that there's so much litigation now too, and so a lot of times, we're meeting with the attorneys and it would be good to have a space to go to for this type of stuff.
I do want to read verbatim too under 29 or 2642 powers and duties of county boards, for my colleagues. It says the county boards of elections within their respective counties shall exercise in the manner provided by this act all powers granted to them by this act, and shall perform all the duties imposed upon them by this act, which shall include the following. And then there's obviously A through
16
P,
of them.
right? All those various powers and duties. I mean, one of them says D, to appoint their own employees, voting machine custodians, and machine inspectors. C would be purchase, preserve, store, and maintain primary and election equipment of all kinds, including voting booths, ballot boxes, and voting machines, and to procure ballots and all other supplies for elections. I say this because I did read litigation at one time that came out of the Commonwealth Court, and one of the judges adjudicated the case, stated that the legislative body of the Commonwealth, meaning the state reps and state legislature, gave pretty much explicit powers to all boards of elections to purchase equipment, and they are the sole authority to purchase equipment. Now, within our own county, I mean, there's no asterisk in the state law that says, with the exception of home rule counties or Luzerne County in general. And I know Mr. Pedri at one point in time, sort of overruled the committee that was looking at voting machines. And I know, speaking to one previous board member, that they were looking at Hart Intercivic, and he chose Dominion. And that was what was brought to county council at the time, and never really went through the board process at that point in
Well,
time.
they made a recommendation.
Yeah,
Their
but-
recommendation was ES&S.
Well, I think it was well, maybe it was the ES&S at that point in time, but I know they were looking at Hart Intercivic too over the Dominion. And then it went in front of county council to purchase these machines. And it was really the previous county manager that chose that particular machine. And that's what they ended up buying. And like I said, I would throw my own father under the bus with that particular vote, because he was not part of the Board of Elections. He's a council member at that time.
Mhm.
And I wasn't on council at that point in time. So, they voted in the affirmative to go and fund the machines that he chose. Well, he's not the Board of Elections. And that's, like I said, it is a power struggle. So I think, our job as a commission is to really look at those lines of separation, see who really has those powers, tighten up the language. Right. And if it,
I do think your solicitor is in the position to help you with that.
Right.
I'm not an attorney, but
Sure.
I see how it's been working, and I think it works very well the way it's set up right now between the board and the administration. I can't see 5 citizen volunteers managing the warehouse and the voting machines and contacting Dominion. It doesn't make sense. A home rule charter style government can assign the administration of these details to the Election Bureau and County Manager, it's not changing the conduct of elections. It's just the administration,
Right,
how
but
it's done.
But when you have a shall in state law, and these might be the differences where even like N says to annually prepare and submit to the county commissioners or other appropriating authorities of the county an estimate of the cost of primaries and elections and of the expenses of the board for the ensuing fiscal year. So the argument is like when under county code, when the commissioners run, they have to step aside. They get 3 different members. They have all the same powers as the 3 commissioners as if they were sitting there during that particular year. Okay. And if they want to change the machines, maybe even against the commissioner's will, they can do that.
That's a commissioner style government, and they're in charge of executive and
but it
legislative.
doesn't matter. Okay. Board of Elections is based on who you put there. I mean, the charter is how you compose the board at a high level. But once you have that composition, those people that are sitting in that chair or in those seats have all the powers afforded to them under state law. And maybe this is where philosophically you and I have that disagreement, but the state law doesn't have a little asterisk that says Luzerne County can do whatever it wants, when it wants, between the board and the management and council, even though, our existing charter separated those duties out, the powers, if they were litigated, and you just saw that within the case this past weekend.
Yeah, ballot drop boxes are different though, because that's under the state Supreme Court case law. That's not legislated within the election code. So that's
Correct.
very different. But the other thing is,
But it was
the charter doesn't spell out the separate all this election code. It's in the administrative
Right,
code.
but let me finish my point though, is that she made a unilateral decision without conferring with the board. And that's where I think she was wrong, in saying that we're not going to send the drop boxes out until the AG sent the letter into the county saying that you will do this because it's really and then I think Attorney General Henry was very stern with the letter and stating that ultimately it's up to the Board of Elections, to do what you will.
I think that's a different situation. I just think that that's a conversation that you guys, all of you commissioners, should have with your solicitor and who can best help you with the difference between commissioner style government, home rule charter, and what the election bureau and county manager can do within it's all really fleshed out in the administrative code for the most part, all those details of what's happening now. And I'm just saying, I think it's working. And I think it works well. And I don't have any complaints with any of those details of, hiring, managing machines, choosing machines, because we have the MOU that we created as a cooperative effort. And I think that's all working, and I think it's legal, but I think that should answer that question, but anything else?
Well, I mean, what I'm saying though is you have memorandums of understanding right now. If you get a different board later on, they can cancel those MOUs out.
Sure.
Right. So we're looking at this from a very high level and a perspective that it has to be sort of tested, sturdily in the future that we want to reduce the amount of litigation at the end of the day. I don't want to see infighting where one agency is filing a lawsuit against the board or vice versa, the board filing a lawsuit against the county. I mean, that's not really being good stewards of taxpayer dollars here. And we, like I said, we can be on the opposite side of the political spectrum, but I think we have more common than we have differences. It's just that I believe that the Board of Elections has more power than you really give yourself. And you choose to exercise, and that's where I think that you have the Board of Elections is supposed to be of strength and in a nonpartisan way. And if you want free and fair elections, you all have to have the backbone to tell the county management no, and same thing with council at times. So and you will follow the law under Title 25. or the election code. So those are the things that, I mean, it says shall, like I said, there's no asterisk there for home rule. The only thing that home rule allows is the composition, and allows us to possibly change the composition and the makeup of who serves there, but not how you serve and what laws you choose to follow and which sections of law you choose to follow and which ones you sort of like rather exert and or send off to the county manager and give them the power to sort of follow certain provisions. I don't think it works that way, because at the end of the day, you're a quasi judicial board by nature. You have the power to investigate. You have the power to appoint your own employees based on what I read in the law. I mean, I have the law put up, and there's only one law in Pennsylvania for elections, and that's supposed to be all across all 67 counties, no matter whether they're home rule or not. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple, I don't know if they're comments or questions. You referenced the fact that you had a lot of interference from council members prior, I think that
I'm sorry, what was that again?
you referenced the fact that there were a lot of interference from council members. And I think most of that happened prior to your serving on the board.
Yes. Yeah, somebody had shared with me once that when I brought that up, that they shared, it's really the responsibility of the chair to make sure that doesn't happen, where people are talking within meetings that shouldn't be, and it should only be limited to public comment. So, one of the things that one of the first board members said to me when I was appointed as chair of the Board of Elections was, "We appointed you because we wanted a strong person." I don't know if a lot of other people like that, but I thought about that when I thought about how there were people jumping in on the meetings, that it really was the chair's responsibility to check that. So I can't say I blame them completely that they were getting involved in the meetings a little more than maybe they should have. They weren't checked either. So maybe if they were told, hey, you can't do that, you're not supposed to be doing that, that would have stopped. But anyways.
You refer a lot to tension between several different components of the county election. Where do you attribute that tension to? Where did that start, or how do you see it at this point?
Yeah, my first year on the board was relatively very smooth. The board members all got along very well. We got along very well with the acting county manager, Kokomo. Everything was a really good working relationship. Probably the spring of 2022, things started changing. The board became very much more partisan in its membership. And that was probably the beginning of when things escalated from there. We seemed to be getting a group of people. It seemed like they were organized group coming to our meetings. One of the issues was ballot drop boxes, and that really escalated. And so the ballot drop boxes in my first year was such a cooperative effort between the Bureau and the board. We didn't even place the first ones, the board. The Bureau did. They got all the sites. They got all the drop boxes. When I came onto the board, those decisions were made by the Bureau, Mr. Morgan, where they were. And then at some later date, I'd have to look at it, we were told, the board has to vote on like having these. And we did. But then, and the ballot drop boxes were really not that big of a deal. And they became a big deal in probably the start, May of 2022. And from then on, yeah. So that's when things really escalated.
And you mentioned that you've been involved in 3 different suits in the election board.
Well, now 3, yeah.
And each time, did you have your own legal representative?
Yes. Yes, the first time, yeah, the Office of Law, there was a discrepancy on the DA's having a special election, not 2 years, 4 years. And there was a divide within the Office of Law between their attorneys on what that should be. That was my understanding. So acting county, the chief solicitor at the time, Chief Solicitor Crocomo, had the board brought in an outside attorney and the board solicitor to share their memorandums on what they thought. And then the board had to listen to both and decide what, between those two opinions, which were very different, what we believed was the case. And then we voted, and that's how it went. So the Office of Law brought in this outside attorney to kind of give their opinion based on what the board solicitor's opinion was. That was a different scenario. And the second one was the ballot question. We did receive that one who gave us that memorandum that first became our outside attorney. And then he continued to be our outside attorney for the ballot question, and also continued to be our outside attorney, the same one for this last litigation. So it's been the same.
Okay. Just for the record, I served 12 years with the council, and I don't believe I had any interference with any election board member. I always felt that the election board had a responsibility and duty to perform, and that was different than what the council performed. And once you members were named by the council, I felt that was your responsibility. And you referenced that to a few different council members. I just want to make it on record that I don't believe that you could mention me as one of those council.
No, I'm not referencing you.
But, you know, I would hope that council members would respect the fact that once you appoint members, their responsibility lies with that group. So, okay, anything else? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we get down to the important part here. Agenda items going forward. Do we want more presentations, and who would we look for to have a presentation?
I think we have Mr. Thornton, who we postponed indefinitely,
Very good.
and Ms. Crocomo.
Well, I talked to Ms. Crocomo, and obviously right now it's a big budget situation. She certainly is willing to meet with us. But Mr. Ritzik, since that was some, ABC's was part of the responsibility you had, would you get in touch with Mr. Thornton?
Yeah, I'll get a hold of him, yes.
Thank you. And we'll schedule him, and then as soon as Ms. Crocomo has some opportunity, we'll schedule her also. What other items would you like to move forward to on the 17th? I have a few thoughts. I think number one, this group has to decide, do we want to consider with a home rule charter? That should be our first question that we should really reach a consensus on. And if that's a consensus, then we know we're going to have other work involved. But number one step, do we want to move to a home rule charter? So that will be on the agenda for our next meeting, okay? One other thing then, when we do our agenda for next meeting, if you can, all the different members, list some of the things that you believe should be addressed in a new charter. It doesn't have to be specific detail. Let's get it on the board though, so we look at it and we make some decisions possibly, or just schedule discussions in regards to those questions or items of consideration or concern. And if we do that, I think we're going to spend a lot of time doing those tasks. And then going forward, we sort of then identified where we want to go to. obviously, from our discussions and presentations, District Attorney Controller's Office, that's obviously going to be something that we're going to talk about, but everybody put together what your lists are. I'm sure as we go through, you'll probably see a lot of the same kind of issues presented by many members of the commission. But that will be a big step forward, I think, into trying to move forward into what we want to do. And if we do that, that'll be very important. We'll schedule, I think Ms. Corcoran will be the last probably person that we'll meet with. Am I correct, Mr. Malachi? The judicial branch did not want to present?
That is correct. The judicial branch did not want to present because their fear that any issues with the home rule charter as presented may be brought in front of them, and they didn't want to intervene while we were debating, researching, writing the charter. So they've stepped aside on this one.
Okay. So you know that they were given the opportunity, they chose not to accept it, and they have their reasons why. Okay. Secretary's report we'll have a treasurer's report, we'll have the solicitor's report. Consultant, what's your plans for the 17th?
My plans are whatever your plans are,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. So if there is a particular item you would like us to research, we're here to do that for the next meeting. If we want to wait, I am actually very interested in what you all, the list that you talked about having everybody put together.
Right.
I think that will give us a nice direction for what are the issues of importance that we really need to look at in terms of the research.
Okay, that's fair.
Can I,
And going forward, you'll have your tasks that will be assigned and you'll know where we're headed.
Correct. And if you have, if there is a consensus that you want anything in particular looked at for next week, we're happy to do that, or we can wait and see what's on the list and move from there.
I think that's probably a good idea. We'll give you direction and then ask you to pick it up from there. Okay.
can I ask that, how does everybody want to do that? Are we going to email to everybody what's on our list? Or?
Well, yes, I think everybody should have that information.
Okay.
We don't meet till the 17th, which is a Thursday evening. We probably should have that the Friday before, because we have an agenda that goes out on that Friday or Monday. Okay. So if you would look at that, so that today is the 7th, right? So Friday is what, the 10th, 11th, 11th? The following Friday, the 11th. Okay. And then that, we'll have that list and we'll compile that. And that'll be part of what we will present as part of the agenda.
Should we have that list? Should we have those emails out by Thursday so that Sharon could?
No, Friday.
Friday's good?
Friday.
Like end of business on Friday?
I would prefer it earlier in the day, but
Okay.
If you can't
That's my
get it till
question.
we have to have the agenda up early the following week because we have a Thursday meeting.
Okay,
It's not quite the schedule we had this meeting.
okay.
Okay.
Do you think we should maybe look at the next meeting that we have? I mean, treat maybe more really as a work session where we're taking all of the ideas, compiling them, like let's say 7 out of 7 people here say, well, reduce the size of county council. It's like, okay, hypothetically, of course, that's going to obviously be something on the list. And then, we can go, everyone agrees on this. And then 2 of 3 people have this idea, or 2 of 7 people and have that idea and kind of, let's say, prioritize it by, how we source our ideas amongst one another. And maybe we can ask like, someone phrased something like this and someone phrased something like that, but maybe it's actually just the same idea in different form, really fluid kind of.
I'm sure there's going to be separate forms.
Back and forth like that.
But I think what I hoped when I considered some of this, there may be some items that I like that you don't like, or vice versa. It would give us an opportunity to maybe present why we like it, and then listen to the opposite side of that. And then hopefully we can make a decision. Yes, we want to look at this, or no, not at this time. a work session. I think it really is a work session, but it will be in public. Okay. Everybody agree with? Okay, and that'll be our format for our next meeting. Anyone from the public who would like to make comments at this time? Please come to the microphone. Please give your name and your residence. Are you okay?
Plug it back in.
You don't need to have it plugged in, they tell me. That's where you need it, the button. Jonathan, can you help her, please?
Okay, I think I've got it now.
Yes, you do.
Okay, Audrey Cernak, I'm in Plains Township. I'm going to be brief. Just quick comments. One of the problems, I'm not going to rehash everything. There's a lot of good comments here. But one of the things is I think the differentiation between the responsibilities of the Bureau and the board has to be made clearer in the charter, because that's a big point of intention. And I think that's where the solicitor is going to come in, how to do that legally. As far as this board solicitor, I think that's necessary. There's only been mentioned the inter-county lawsuits that the board's been involved in, but being a board of elections, they've gotten roped into a lot of other lawsuits. Every other board of election in Pennsylvania has. Ballot curing, the dating on the mail ballots, there's just two of them. And I know the Office of Law had hired a consultant for that, essentially. So they do have an attorney for that. So that's something that could be considered. This is a specialty, as some people have pointed out, and legally. So that would be probably a good idea, just even from that standpoint. Otherwise, I just want to thank everybody for their thorough work. But Dr. Baldino, Denise Williams, I can't tell you how much I admire Denise for really stepping up and really guiding us through this, because I don't know that anybody truly realizes the change that mail-in ballots have brought to our election processes, and just what the boards of election and the bureaus of elections have had to adapt through. And it really has been a terribly steep learning curve, just getting everything, the procedures put through, the efficiencies worked on, and frankly, just basically their leadership, their thoughts to just make things even better for the county. I really want to thank them, and also for the commission here for all your time and effort that you're spending. So again, thank you. And that's really all I have to say at the moment.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay.
Ms. Cernak, can you spell your last name for the records?
Okay. S is in Sam, E-R-N-I-A-K.
And Mr. Ritzik, I think Ms. Lawrence will probably know that. Anyone else? Anyone on the Zoom? With their hand up? Mr. Rabel. Can you hear us, Mr. Rabel?
Yes, Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Mark Rabel, Hazelton speaking. First of all, Mr. Chair, as you well know from me attending council meetings since the beginning of home rule, as well as Mr. Urban, I pride myself on giving independent thought, and also based on my research, based on law, and being utterly removed of emotion or ego from anything I comment on in front of a public body. You of all people know that. Mr. Urban knows that too. That being said, okay, with respect, as you well know, during the time that council has been active and the manager's been active since the beginning of home rule, I've always said recommendation number 7 of the 2010 study commission should be the guiding point of any elected official or appointed official within our county government. That recommendation number 7 is the most well-crafted, well-drafted recommendation that I've seen with respect to the 2010 study commission, because that pretty much is a guiding light to all officials, that based on what was transpiring at the time with all the corruption, all of the mishap, all of the incompetence, and all of the backbiting and intergovernmental lawsuits at the time. If that's used as the guiding principle in this study commission, we will still be on the right track. Furthermore, as far as going to Mr. Baldino or Professor Baldino's comment, I would suggest, as far as that paper, the statement from the Secretary of State at the time, Mr. McGinley, I think, and Mr. Urban, you're aware, as far as the Record Retentions Act, and this is in the Home Rule Manual, that the records for any government study commission of any year would be found. I think a copy of it is given to DCED before the final draft copy is put out to the voters. So that being said, I would think that the lady from Pennsylvania Economy League could work with you and the commission to find those prior meeting minutes of the prior commissions from the Pennsylvania Historical Commission or from DCED, whichever one has those documents. Mr. Chair, I have a two questions. One is for the bad actors brought by the vice chair, who he considers as the bad actors, because I might not be a Democrat, but I am a citizen and resident of this county lifelong, might I add. And just because I have a difference of opinion does not make me a bad actor. That's number one. Number two, as far as the question regarding the public hearings, Mr. Chair, when will there be public hearings by the study commission? Because if history serves and my memory serves me, the other study commissions had public hearings where the public, it was a town hall style public hearing. And there were many, especially in the southern end, as maybe I'm sure Professor Baldino can, elaborate on. So I think that there needs to be public hearings, town hall style meetings, if possible, or even roving meetings. Like Mr. Chair, you remember from the council, there would be roving meetings once a year for the different areas of Luzerne County. So I think that suggestion would be well advised for the study commission. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Reba, I was not inferring that you were a bad actor. I said the dysfunction that sometimes is perceived by bad actors. So I'm not inferring anybody in particular, political party affiliation, bad actors. I'm just referencing the dysfunction that sometimes is referenced by bad actors. That's all.
And I think, Ms. Rabo, you're a little premature requesting those public town hall kinds of meetings. We have to decide if we're going to go forward with the new charter. Once that's decided, and once some of the issues are decided, I think you're right. I think we should probably look to move. There's several areas, and most of the time, the municipal buildings are more than happy to have a group of our size or meet there. And I think everybody will agree to it. We'll see going forward.
I will just say that I've spent some time in Hazleton City Hall, and they do have Zoom capabilities and a nice open meeting room in their city hall. So, one potential place.
Well, we did have a meeting at the city hall down there. We also had a meeting in the Hazel Township, who worked out very well. But let's make our first decisions, and then we can decide on moving forward with the rotation of meetings. Okay? We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Hi.
Thank you.